I'm gonna first of all thank everyone for joining us today, and welcome to the closing talk of the conference. I would like to give you a quick overview of the format of this talk before we move on to some introductions. So the first part of the webinar will be Bosky's presentation, and we have saved some time for questions and answers at the end. There is a Q&A option in Zoom. You can post your questions there and even upvote the ones you find most interesting. If you want to make a comment, if you want to ask a question or share your experience by speaking instead of typing, you can always use the option raise your hand through the button on your console, and we will allow you to speak as soon as possible. So now we will be moving to some short introductions. My name is Melissa, and I'm Head of Tech Relations at Certis, and I will be the moderator for this talk. Our speaker is Bosky Atlani, and she's a VP of Engineering at Valant. To give you a short background on Certis, we are a digital solutions company with more than 100 engineers distributed across Europe. We help companies to foster improvement in how they build software and to get applications built in a faster, better way through providing nearshoring, staff augmentation, and consulting services. As a company, we have extensive experience in the area of .NET and numerous engineers working with Microsoft technologies. And the purpose of this conference is to share our experience and also for us to learn from the questions asked and the insights shared by participants, attendees, and external speakers. So we are very happy to say that we have successfully collaborated with Valant for over 4 years, and today we have Bosky Atlani as a keynote speaker with us today. Valant is the market leader in behavioral health software for private practices. The company was founded in 2005 to provide behavioral health practices, agencies, and clinicians with cloud-based software to streamline administration and empower what's most important, improving outcomes. So, inspired by the fact that technology has transformed all of our lives in meaningful ways, Valant has reinvented the behavioral health platform. So, to introduce the speaker herself, I'll say that she's Bosky Atlani and is a VP of Engineering at Weiland, as I already said. And I also can say that she's one of the best managers in the team because I got some feedback from people that worked already with her. She has extensive experience delivering quality enterprise and consumer-based software, and she has worked in multiple roles, including leadership positions, and has exposure to mature organizations as well to startup environments. I think I'm going to let Bosky start with her presentation now.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Like Melissa said, my name is Bosky, and I'm VP of Engineering at Weiland. Like also she said, I've worked in the industry for quite a bit as a developer, as a tester, and then recently, like since the past 1 year, like as a leader of a small team, and I've been learning a lot, and it's my like I'm new at this gig, so in trying to figure out, well, how do we get these processes established and scaled to work for Weiland. So I have experience, with application lifecycle. Like I've seen so many forms of it throughout my experience. So when I was at Microsoft, we used like in-house tools to do application lifecycle management, or SDLC. Worked for another company, a smaller company, we used Target Process and TeamCity, and then at Weiland, we started to use JIRA and Jenkins. So, I feel like I've seen a lot of like the gamut of the tools, and maybe not all of them, but, hopefully enough to really to talk about it here, and to tell you why I feel like Azure DevOps is really, in my experience, one of the simpler tools that we have seen. So with that, I think I'm going to move to the first slide. I think I'm going to move to the first slide.
Yeah. Now.
All right. So where we started, and like Melissa said, Weiland is behavioral health EHR. And what's our tech stack? We are .NET based. We are hosted on the cloud on AWS, and we actually started. Weiland had two products. One that was geared towards the private practice behavioral health practices, and one was more like an enterprise based, like government based practices. And so when I like a year back, we decided to disband the enterprise product and refocus back on the private practice product, which was basically in support mode for 6 years or so. So where we started was we had the enterprise product, and we use these technologies. We use JIRA for work management. We use Bitbucket for source control, Jenkins for builds and pipelines, and Zephyr for test management. And but we were going to disband in that product, and then we were going to move on to this to the legacy but supported but revenue earning product. And we were like, well, and that product was just sitting like in a closet, and we needed to take it out and dust it off, because it was a different team, and because it was not really managed. And so we had to take that off, and we had to figure out, well, do we still want to keep doing the same thing like JIRA, Jenkins, Bitbucket, Zephyr, or do we want to do something different? And so, well, what did we really want? So what we wanted was something that was easy, something that was opinionated. So with JIRA, it's so flexible that there's a lot of decision fatigue. You have to figure out, well, should I use this extension? Should I do this rule, or how should I configure it? So it almost requires, what we learned was like a full JIRA administrator to administer everything we wanted. So we wanted something that was going to be a quick start for us. So that's one thing. We wanted one place. We didn't want to have to integrate from different things. We wanted one place for source controls, one place for work items, builds, deployments, test cases, just complete integration and complete traceability of your entire application lifecycle management. We wanted it in the cloud. Ideally, we didn't want to host our own agents or maintain our own servers. So that was a requirement. We wanted to keep the cost low as we can get it. So that's just part of being a VP. So you have to think about the cost. Can't just think about this engineering. And good integration with the tech stack, which I already mentioned, Visual Studio.NET, AWS, Git. All right. So in this presentation, like the way I've approached it is kind of, it's not about like teaching you Azure DevOps. This is not what the goal of this presentation is. The goal is kind of to, give you a little bit of how we have used Azure DevOps at Weiland, and maybe that helps you if you decide to use it, like, okay, that's how you can possibly do it. So that's why I'm going to go through like kind of each of the stages, and so follow along with me. All right. How we do work management. Work management is, basically your requirements backlog, right? For the most part, this is, we have been able to kind of just use whatever Azure DevOps provided. Azure DevOps comes with about 4 process templates. I call them process templates. And depending on the process of your organization, you can choose one that's closest to you. So we chose Agile. That's how we work. So we chose the Agile template, and we customized it a little bit, not overly so. So we added some custom fields, we added some custom states and custom rules for straight transitions that were appropriate for organizations. Give you an example, like for fields, we added some like we wanted to do some effort tracking in terms of hours. We added that. For states, we had like ready for testing and ready for acceptance. Those states didn't exist in Azure DevOps, so we added that. And then some rules like, if a work item moves from code review to sorry, actually, if a work item moves from from ready for development to in progress, then we automatically assign the developer who's the developer on that story. So some rules like that. So they did that. The other important thing for work management was this concept of teams. So Azure DevOps has, you can have multiple projects within an organization. Multiple projects are quite like separate. I mean, yeah, you can move items from one project to another, but they have kind of their own like distinct like users and separation. So the question came up, and especially in those early days when we started, there was not a lot of documentation on like how do you manage teams in Azure DevOps. So like in our organization, we had 3 teams, and we wanted to, you know, obviously each team have some level of their own backlog and their own iterations, because we don't all follow the same, like, yeah, our sprint starts at you know, 6:18, and so we wanted some customization. So the way you do that in Azure DevOps is with this terminology they use called area path. So an area path is simply a field really on every work item in Azure DevOps where you can assign that work item to that area path. An area path is directly mapped to a team. So you can have multiple teams, and then each team, because of their area path designation, they get their own sort of backlog, their own iterations. They can configure that. They can configure their own boards. Like if they didn't want a particular lane or a column, they could do that. They could do things like different coloring, like for their cards. So that's sort of the team management. Couple of you know, I call them pro tips, although I don't know if you're really pros, but yet we're getting there. So the couple of pro tips that I would say that has kind of really helped our efficiency and just nice to have in Azure DevOps is this work item templates. So work item templates are really cool because you can, you know, kind of like put some smart defaults and create a template out of it, and it's just a link, and anybody can just use that link to basically get those same smart defaults. And it's really handy for us for support. Actually, we have bugs. They write bugs, but then, you know, they tend to, you know, forget something, or they may not follow the right template. And yes, we could make them required fields, but it's not always required. So so it's been sort of really efficient for us. But you could do that for, like, you know, if it was a tech debt story, and if there was a checklist we wanted to put in the work item, you could do that. So quite handy. Bulk edit, that's like just so super easy in Azure DevOps. It's kind of ridiculous how easy that is. Whereas you can just, you know, it's like Excel built in almost. And I know, I'm sure there are people who love and hate Excel, but, you know, I'm one of those people who do love Excel. So you just, you know, you go in and you just, you know, select a bunch of items, and then you say, you know, edit, and you can set field to whatever you want. And it's just so quick and so easy. And sometimes you want to do that, right? Like you want to clean up some things, like you add a new field for somewhere in the middle of the process, and you want to default it, like you want to default the application area. And this is really good because, you know, when you start a new process in your company, you may not have it all figured out. You know, you may not have like, oh yeah, this is a perfect template. So you want to be able to, you know, iterate. So things like this really help you and not feel frustrated and go like, well, how should I do this? All right, work management, source control. Source control, we used Azure DevOps' Git. So Azure DevOps does support, you know, I believe it supports GitHub. It's also owned by Microsoft now. It supports other things like Subversion and TFS and all sorts of source control systems. But we used Azure DevOps one. We thought it was nice to have it. Just as I mentioned, one of our goals was one place where everything is, so we didn't really want to put it in another place. The really nice thing was the PR policies, the code review policies. sorry, I want to back up a little bit. So the nice thing about Azure DevOps is unlimited repos. You know, it's not like Bitbucket where you have to pay an extra for like if you want unlimited repos, or you have to pay by repository. So it's just unlimited repository. Although we are mostly a monorepo, like we have like 3 repositories, so it's quite funny. But for some others, this might be really good. The PR policies or code review policies. So we have configured the following. So there is the minimum number of reviewers that need to sign off on the code review. There is green builds, like you have to have a green build before you can merge to your integration branch. You need to link a work item, like it has to be associated with something. And this is really important, and this part I'll mention a little bit later on why this is so critical that we actually have this policy. And code review templates. So like, for example, we have our custom code review checklist for things that we have a hard time enforcing with ReSharper or other ways to do it. We at least put a checklist to remind people to do things. So again, this is just like there, right? Like, you know, I think in Bitbucket, you have to get to their most premium plan to actually be able to do this. So it's really nice to be able to do that. All right, now things get really meaty. So this is the builds and the release pipelines. You know, like I really think Azure DevOps shines when we start to talk about this, because everything else is like commodity. Yeah, you know, most people have it, but you know, it starts to really shift a little bit here. So builds. So for us, we are a monolith. What that means is we have basically all our different parts of our application in one repository, and they could be like fundamentally different, where like one is a web app or one is a Windows app, and we even have like Docker services as well. So we have, but we have one repo, and we also wanted one build. And the reason is we wanted to know that we're not breaking anything. So remember that our code base is about 15 years old, and there's just a lot of fear that, you know, that we'll do something and break something else. So we just wanted to kind of have that one view of like everything is good. So, but you know, if we actually just had one build, it was like ridiculously slow. So what we have done with Azure DevOps is we have broken down sort of our build into, it's still one build, but there are multiple jobs. And some of the jobs build parallel to each other, and some have, you know, kind of a dependency chain, like for example, the merge Weiland.io artifacts depends on build Weiland.io JS and build Weiland.io to be built. It still takes really long. It still takes like 40 minutes. So we have to optimize this way further. But the fact that you can run things in parallel is really good. And we run all sorts of things. So it has a very rich, you know, plugin architectures for plugins collection for both builds and release pipelines. So you can see we run things like we build Silverlight. I know you can believe it. We have Silverlight. So we built Silverlight, which, you know, uses like VS 2015. We build IO, which is, you know, our VS 2019. We build SPA applications, which are, you know, NPM based. We build Docker services, which use our Ubuntu agents and use Docker Compose. So we have the gamut, and we have like Windows and Ubuntu agents. And we can do this. You know, there's no problem. So that's kind of the versatility of, you know, how much it does support. So, all right, deployments. So in Azure DevOps, when they talk about deployments, they talk about pipelines, and so you'll see the verbiage there is like release pipelines. And I think this is Azure DevOps, it tends to be, prescriptive and a little bit opinionated. It's like, this is how it should work. So luckily, our process meets really closely with what they propose. And so we are definitely continuous integration. We are, and partly continuous deployment. We don't deploy all the way to production without any. We just don't deploy all the way to production with every check-in. We have some gates there. So, and I'll talk about the gates in a bit. But so this is basically our pipeline that we have configured in Azure DevOps. So you can see there is a CI trigger. So basically we have our integration branch, which we call develop. You can see that right there. Once anybody checks in into or merges anything into develop, it triggers this pipeline. It pulls from multiple places. So our infrastructure code, which is the code to actually deploy things to AWS, sits in a different repository, which is code deploy. So you can have any number of artifacts you want. So the pipeline could be, from, if you had multiple repos, for example, you could have multiple artifacts coming from different repos here. So the first thing it does is it deploys to our testing environment. So it's broken down to stages, and stages really, for the most part, like if you read any Azure DevOps documentation, map to an actual an environment in most of the cases. So our case, we have the testing environment, the staging, and production environment. So it deploys it to testing. And then you can see we have these like user looking icons on the pipeline. These are approval gates. So as I mentioned, we don't directly go to staging like on every check-in or to production on every check-in. And the reason being is that we are still sort of building our test automation suite. We don't have that full coverage. And so we need a period of regression before we can promote up to staging or production. So therefore, we have these gates there, and we, periodically we release like every 2 weeks. So we, when we are ready to release, we will actually, give a thumbs up and it'll go up. But it's completely automated, and that's the beauty of it. You'll notice this, which is kind of our work in progress, the test automation suite pipeline. This is end-to-end tests. So these are not unit tests. These are not even like integration kind of code tests. These are end-to-end. We use a third-party open source thing called Test Project IO, and we really like it because it requires actually no coding to write tests. And so they are end-to-end test scenarios, and they run against the testing environment. Once we have enough confidence on these, ideally we would actually have this as also a gate even before you can move to staging. But right now it's sort of parallel, so we're just vetting out our automation. Let's see, what else do I want to say about these pipelines? Yes, actually, let me go back to the diagram because it's more visual. Variables, you'll see this over here. The variables, what variables are just, these are things you can configure. Like if you had a feature flag for an environment, or if you have a configuration setting that's different for each environment, you can configure that in the variables. There are also, Azure DevOps will also provide some system variables. Like for example, they might let you know if there are what branch it is, and so there are variables, and then there are output variables. So within testing, staging, and production, it's actually broken down again by like multiple jobs, just like how the build pipeline looked like. So you can actually pass, a particular job or task in a job could generate some output that could be useful to another. So very configurable. Like I don't expect you to understand all of it, but what I want to point out is that, there's just a lot of flexibility with those variables. So you should be able to do what you're trying to do to deploy things. And then lastly, I want to say, oh yes, that the way we deploy, how do we deploy? We deploy everything using, we already had existing code deploy scripts. So we basically deploy to AWS. Sorry, I don't have a deeper breakdown of these, but deploy everything to AWS using code. All right, I want to pause for a second because I've been talking so much.
Yeah. In the meantime, there is someone that asked a quick question. One of our attendees called, I can see here, Marco, but maybe we can go through all the questions at the very end. And I just want to ask you something very, very quickly, possible?
Yeah.
So, were you able to migrate your existing work items and from JIRA Bitbucket to Azure DevOps? And if so, what was the process like?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that was also, even though I didn't list it as one of the criteria, we didn't want to lose, as I mentioned, we have so much domain knowledge that's been sitting there for 10 to 15 years. We didn't want to completely lose all that and just start from fresh, especially for work items. Source control is a little bit easier. We didn't care about maintaining history so much, but for work items, our user stories and our requirements. So what we did there is Azure DevOps comes with a plugin, it's in their marketplace, and it's by Code Agility. It's a Azure DevOps migration tool or something like that, and it's really nice. You can basically point to a query in JIRA and define some rules like, if you see this state, move it into this state in Azure DevOps. So it's a command line tool. You can run it, and so we were able to move it. So it was relatively smooth. It was relatively smooth, and we took that opportunity to simplify it too. We had way many states in JIRA, so we kind of collapsed it down. For the source control, I think we ran into some issue with trying to maintain history, but I can't remember what it was. So we didn't actually, the way we did the source control was literally like get the source on local and create new repositories and push it up on Azure DevOps. So we didn't actually do a pure migration on that. The pipelines, we needed to recreate them anyways. But I do know that Azure DevOps, for example, if you had a Jenkins pipeline, you could run your Jenkins pipeline through Azure DevOps. I don't think that would be a very good integration, not like Azure DevOps pipelines, but it may help you get started and iterate. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for your answer. As I said, there is one more question, but probably it's better if we answer at the end. So I think you have a few more slides to go through.
Yes, right? Yes. Yeah. All right. So this is something that our organization has a need for, and you won't see a lot of this. Like, I don't think we found any documentation on Azure DevOps about this. So whenever you read Azure DevOps documentation about deployments, they are mostly talking about, kind of the pipeline I just showed you, like, oh, you have an integration environment, you have a staging, you have production, and so on. What we wanted was, we had a need for on-demand environments. So what that means is, even before it integrates, we wanted to see if the quality was good enough for a particular area or a particular feature, or we didn't want to really merge it until the feature was completely ready. So we wanted these, like, very much like production environment. And then we wanted, and if you do a lot of these, it starts to get really expensive. So so it's like, okay, if within a week, if there are multiple teams working on different features and they all want to test theirs, you could have like 3 or 4 environments. If they're constantly running the whole stack, like your SQL server, your multiple, like your web server, your Windows server, it starts to get really expensive. So we wanted the ability to spin up an environment on demand and then be able to shut down the environment if possible for a brief period of time, and then stop it and delete it all through the pipeline. So this is kind of, I think, a genius of our DevOps team, really. So what they did was they did use the release pipelines, but really it's more of a control center for code deploy. So developers and QA and product doesn't need to log on into AWS. So what that means is there's a step to actually do the deployment, to spin up the environment and to do a deployment. But then there are other steps, like how you saw staging and testing. There's other steps like start environment, stop environment, delete environment. So I could spend like a whole presentation talking about feature environments, but I just don't have that time in this one. But if you want to know more, you reach out to me, and we'll be able to tell you more. But it's possible to do something like this, is what I'm trying to say in this presentation. Releases. So as I mentioned, we're not full CI/CD. So what that means is that we do have to manage releases, as in like we do release every 2 weeks. We don't release continuously. So it requires some management. There are many ways to do this, and every organization could have a different way to approach it. The way we approach it, prior to release, we lock the branches, and that is just so that we like to be able to deploy from our integration branch versus doing a special hotfix branch and users developers maintaining these multiple branches for a while. So, and our regression period is really short, generally like a day or 2. So we lock the branches for a couple of days, and so we do that. And the most interesting thing we found that was useful for us to manage releases is this thing called scope list. The thing we call the scope list. It's not an Azure DevOps term, it's our term. So, okay, so how do you know what is in production and what is been since in your integration environment merged in? How do you know what's changed? How do you track that? So, it's a fundamental release management problem. If you're not releasing continuously and you want to track what's got released and what made it out, you either track it during planning or you track it like this, like the way we do it, which is, so we look at what build made it out to production, let's say build number 1, and then we look at what build is in our integration environment, let's say build number 23. So between 1 and 23, you can use the Azure API to find a difference, and it lists out all the work items that have been checked in. And do you remember I said to you, well, one of our PR policies is that the work item must be linked to a PR, and it's for this reason. So besides normal tracking, it's for this reason, because once that work item is linked to a PR, it's linked to a commit, it's linked basically in the build process. So we know what's changed, and that's like really useful for us, because what we use that for is 2 things. One is regression testing, because from there we are able to do targeted regression. It's like, oh, these are things we changed. We're not going to test the whole application. We're going to test what's changed. And second, we use it to do a release scope, like a communication to other stakeholders on what has changed. So this is much easier than like maybe having work items move into like ready for deployment or some other way to track it and forgetting to do it. So this is easier because we close the work item and then we use this automated process. And we do this through Azure API. So this is not available directly within Azure DevOps' UI, but they do have an API and you can use that for that. All right. QA. I have to admit, at Valant, we are still sort of maturing our QA process. and so both manual and automated. So for automated, I kind of briefly mentioned to you what we did with the test automation suite. We also have unit tests that run as part of the builds. But for manual, we use something called Azure test plans. So test cases, they're actually available by default. And you can associate a test case with a user story, with a feature, whatever. But by themselves, they don't seem to, like, for us, if you can't organize them, it sort of just doesn't, we can't really reuse it. So we added on Azure Test Plans, which is a paid feature of Azure DevOps. You have to pay extra for it. And it allows us to basically organize the test cases into test suites, maybe by feature area, and test plans like a release test plan or a smoke test plan. So we needed that for our execution. So they have a test runner, just like any other good test runner, where you can execute the test plan, where you can go step by step, mark each step done, you can do screenshots, you can do video captures, you can create a bug. When you create a bug, it links it to your test case that you were testing. So all sorts of basic stuff, it's all there. The nice thing about, since I mentioned it's a paid feature, not all of your team needs to have the Azure test plans to actually see the plan, to see the plans and to even execute them. So if I'm a dev and I don't have Azure test plans, I can still execute them and I can still run them. I just can't define them. So, but I could define test cases. So it works for us, so we don't have to pay for the whole team to have Azure test plans, which is quite expensive, and I'll talk about that in the cost slide. Pro tip: query-based suites. Very powerful way to create a test suite. So you can have multiple test cases, and you could have some metadata and some attribution on those test cases, like you could say what feature area they belong, or what application they belong. And let's suppose you wanted to create a test suite that touches multiple apps, but it's in feature area A, then you can do a query-based suite for that. So it's pretty powerful. So I encourage you to explore that if you get into test plans. Analytics. Analytics, we use many of the out-of-box metrics that Azure DevOps has, things like velocity, cumulative flow diagram, cycle time, lead time, bug burn down, code coverage. These are all sort of just available by default. You don't need to do anything except maybe create your own dashboard around it. The other thing we do a lot is we export it out to Excel, and I love Excel, I mentioned that already. So queries can be exported out to Excel for further analysis. Like one of the things it doesn't report is burn down trends, like is our burn down, going, is it improving or not improving? Not the number itself, but the trend of the burn down. So that by exporting data into Excel. And then there's this thing Azure DevOps has, which is called analytic views. The idea behind analytic views is it can be pulled into Power BI. I have only briefly played around with it. I can imagine it being powerful, but I just haven't had much success in trying to do what I was trying to do, which is figure out the age, like the average age in a particular state for a work item. So, but I hope that we can fix that. And so, this thing, how we tie it all together. And I think this was one of our goals, and it's one of the core value adds that Azure DevOps has, is this thing called traceability. Everything is traceable in Azure DevOps. So, you start with your work item, it's linked to your branches and your commits and your pull requests, and then the builds, are referenced. The pull requests and builds are related, and builds are referenced in releases, and then when you do an automatic, like you do unit test, it generates test run result, which is associated to a build, and test run result also talks about test cases, and a work item is tested by a test case. So you can just see, right, like, but you start anywhere. You're trying to debug an issue, you know, you're trying to figure out what caused this. You can go from like, oh, okay, you know, this, it was caused by, you know, it was happening in this build, and then it was happening in this commit, and then this was linked to that work item, and then I looked at that test case. So you can imagine how efficient it makes you, because, you know, when you run an organization, the easy part is writing the code. The hard part is, you know, maintaining and debugging and tracking it, you know, and so that's the biggest value add from my perspective. What we pay, two categories we pay in: users. For the most part, users don't cost us anything except for QA. So for the different users, like supports and sales, in Azure DevOps, you can use a stakeholders license, so that costs $0. For developers, we already had a Visual Studio Professional license, and if you do, you don't have to pay for that, so that's $0. Product owners, we only have 3 product owners in our organization. For them, would need to purchase a basic license, but the first 5 are free, so that's $0. And for QA, we need the test license, and that's expensive, so that's $52 per user. Repositories, unlimited repositories, $0. Pipelines, what we need to pay for is the agents. We have 8 Microsoft hosted agents, which cost $40 per pipeline or per agent. You can look at it anyway. And 2 self-hosted. So why do we have 2 self-hosted agents? And we have that because of Silverlight. Microsoft does not support VS 2015 builds. They used to, but they removed support recently. And so we have to have our own way of building those. And those are a little cheaper, $15 per agent or $15 per pipeline. So the first one is actually free. So total cost basically comes out to be about $600 a month. In JIRA, we paid about $800 a month. So that's pretty good savings, and it's pretty scalable for us. We have more devs, you know, we'll always have Visual Studio Professional license, you know. And if you have an enterprise license, like the test license is also not extra for that. So depending on your organization, this may come out to be cheaper. And so that's kind of, you know, I think that's all the aspects I want to walk through, but, you know, I wanted to have that one final slide of like, okay, you know, 1 year we have been on this journey, you know, what is it that we, you know, come out of it thinking about it? And so what we love the seamless integration, the traceability. We love the marketplace for extensions. I didn't talk about this, but there's some really awesome extensions like retros. If you want to do a sprint retrospectives, it's a great extension there. And it's like a Trello built in. It's really great. And one of the biggest thing is that Azure DevOps has such great interoperability with non.NET stuff. So non-Windows stuff, like we use Ubuntu, we use Git, we use AWS, we use Docker. So, you know, it's almost misleading they call it Azure DevOps, because it's not like, if you don't have to be on Azure to be on Azure DevOps. So I just want to make sure that, you know, like sometimes like it's just like, oh, like, you know, I think it might be like, might stop some people, you know, in early on if they don't do their research. What we wish the test plans were cheaper. We wish there was a little bit more process configurability for each team. So we have one process, as I mentioned, and we have customized it. And the board, and within the team, you can customize the boards and the backlogs, but a little bit more configurability, like if you wanted a different state or a different field only for a particular team, we can't do that. Feature environments support. So, you know, they tend to, their pipelines tend to be, you know, around like, oh, you have a static environment versus something like you want to spin up and spin down. So if they had a little bit more support structure around that, I think we would have simplified our use case, but that could be just us. This could be just our use case. More out-of-the-box analytics like work item age. Like I want to know if a card has been aging for a while and I don't have a way of saying that in Azure DevOps. What we're looking forward to, these are things in Azure DevOps already has, but we haven't gotten to. Power BI, as I mentioned, for doing a little bit more powerful analytics. Our Azure Artifacts. This is like like an NPM private repository or things like that. We haven't really used it for storing any packages. We don't really have packages yet, but we will be migrating to do that at some point. And then linking end-to-end test automation with test cases. So our test automation right now, end-to-end one, is not actually linked to any test cases. So when it actually fails, we don't have a kind of link back. So we want to be able to do that. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Azure DevOps, and just want to listen to your questions.
Great. Thank you for your presentation, Bosky. Thank you for sharing all this content with us. There are a couple of questions. I'm going to start with one that came earlier. So it's coming from Marco. And I think he wants you to explain something particular that you were talking during the presentation. So what was the name of the E2E testing framework, please? I didn't quite understand this.
Testproject.io.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good. Let me ask you a couple more questions that I can see here, okay? So what are the other tools you have considered? And was there another one that was close to got it for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. We were, I mean, besides JIRA and besides JIRA, we didn't really did a hard analysis on like any other tools. Like those were our top contenders, and we didn't for us. It was important that it was something that like Azure DevOps was a quick choice for us, because just looking at it, we could see that it is very it can support our tech stack and our infrastructure, and it's .NET based, and it has a backing of Microsoft, which made us more comfortable. So we didn't want to go completely something new. And I've used things like Target Process in the past, and thought about that. But the thing about those is they tend to be not a whole ecosystem. They tend to be sort of you have to figure out how to make it work with everything. So it didn't really, to be honest. So
okay, thank you. So there are a couple more questions that I have here, but I just wanna just a reminder, yeah. So guys, it's for the audience. So if you wanna make a comment or share your experience or ask a question, as a reminder, there is a Q&A function in Zoom where you can type your questions, or you can raise your hand and we will give you the floor to speak as soon as possible, just in case someone else wants to ask something, okay?
Yeah, and if you're an engineer like me and scared to always ask a question, please don't be scared, because it's just, it's just a question, it's just a conversation. I'm not scary at all, so.
So another one is, what is the process customization specifically that you needed compared to the Agile process, and what additional states did you need? Yeah,
so what we needed, it was mostly in the in the fields and the states area. So fields, I gotta mention, we needed effort in hours. I think it comes with effort. I forget, it has an effort field, but I don't think it was in hours. So we wanted that. And we needed metadata field. That I think that would be probably something most people would need, around how we think about our application, about our product, right? So we had fields like application, feature area, application area, and those are needed for querying, let's look at all the bugs that are in patient portal, for example, So we needed that kind of fields. For states, we needed, I mentioned these kind of what we call the queuing states, and not all organizations need it, but we do use them. So we have a ready for test, ready for acceptance, and those states didn't exist. Early on, we even had a ready for deployment state, but we removed that once we got that scope list thing figured out. So that was really helpful. we added for our sustainment team, which is our maintenance, like, look at bugs and stuff. For them, we added like a dev analysis stage, which is different from analysis, which is, mostly like we think of that in our organization as a product function. So yeah, I think those are the majority of them. And they're not a lot, to be honest. Like, it really is like, it took us probably 5-10 minutes to add those. And then bulk edit and you're done and you're good to go. So.
Very good. Thank you for the answer. There is another one here. So the question is, how do you approach environment creation for your future environments? And do you reuse them, or is there a provisioning mechanism in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we wanted them dynamic. So as I mentioned, we wanted them to be able to spin up on demand, because we didn't want environment to stay there the whole time and incur cost. So yeah, we're a scrappy company, so we always try to conserve cost. So they're provisioned on demand. They're provisioned on demand, and we also can deprovision them from the pipeline. So, and that's thanks to our DevOps engineer. He has, code deploy and Terraform templates all linked up to Azure DevOps, so it's quite powerful. So
good. Thank you. I think I'm going to ask you the last question here, Bosky. So for releases, why have you decided to lock your branches?
Yeah, this is kind of a debate that we still keep having, whether we should lock the branches or not. So we lock them because there are pros and cons. So we lock them because I personally think that the approach of, so we do have a period where we need to do regression testing. So we need to kind of control what the build that we are going to release. Okay, so we want to know which build are we going to release, right? So it's not completely continuous deployment, and there's not enough test automation to give us confidence. So there's a period where we want to verify that build. Okay, and there are two options to do that. One is we lock the current branch, so no more check-ins. This is the build, and and this is what's deployed on testing. Go at it, QA, and we'll deploy this to production if everything goes good. The other option is to create a hotfix branch from it and deploy that build to our integration environment and have testing there. And so developers can still check in to develop, but we test on the hotfix one. And in my opinion, the hotfix world creates more churn than like there are these separate branches that need to be maintained. If we figure out a bug, we need to apply to both develop and hotfix, and it complicates things. The other thing is that we have one testing environment. So what that would mean is we would have to stop CI trigger to testing while the hotfix or the release candidate or whatever is being tested. And so it makes management a little bit trickier. So we try to keep our our regression short and just lock it for a day or two. And I don't think it hurts our small team much. If it was a bigger team, we couldn't lock that because there'd be too many people waiting too much. So we would have to figure out a different solution and maybe a different pipeline for release candidates, or just improve our test automation so we can be CI/CD all the way through. So
yeah. So I think that's all for today, Bosky. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today and for all the questions and all the observations shared. Well, we are really happy to have hosted this conference as we have learned a lot from our speakers, like you today, for example, and as well as from our audience. And thank you guys for all your questions. In the coming days, we will work on making all the talks available online, and we hope to see everyone at our next online event. So guys, have a nice evening, and Bosky, thank you so much.
Thanks guys, thanks everyone for listening to my talk, and thanks Melissa.
Thank you. Bye.